Come on.
It is. Hi. Okay. Yeah, Josef Pieper. I'm very excited. It probably doesn't surprise you to hear me say that I love Thomas Aquinas, but this is the book that we're going to be talking about. Josef Pieper was German, so he thinks differently than an American philosopher / theologian. I shouldn't have said theologian. This is a philosophy class. He thinks differently than an American philosopher. For example, the way he talks about science, we talked about that a little bit. We've talked about that over and over in the class a little bit. English speakers, Anglophone type people tend to assume that science is only that which is empirically verifiable and repeatable. I think about test tubes, stuff that you can put in a test tube and observe and repeat. But in non-English speaking contexts like Germany and France, they really don't think about it that way. They mean something more pre-modern, something like you might find in Aristotle or Thomas Aquinas, namely just a rigorous system of deduction, not necessarily that is empirically verifiable, okay? So, yeah. He died in 1997, Josef Pieper did, so he didn't quite make it into the 21st century. But I think that he's recent enough to where you could consider him to be a contemporary thinker, all right? Okay, I'm gonna read this. I wrote this in grad school and I'm just gonna read it, okay? And please, I hope you'll pay attention. I hope you did the reading. I did add another chapter. I'm not a perfectionist, so if you didn't do the reading, it'll be okay. But I do hope that you're interested in Thomas Aquinas. He's very important. You know, in some ways, he's the paradigm, the climax of medieval thought, I would say. So I hope that you're interested, and I really hope that you will stop and ask questions or say something that you find interesting or unusual or whatever. Are you with me? Will you do that, Jacob? Will you do that, Jacob? Will you do that, Mirka? I hope so. Okay. All right, I'm going to read. Now, I thought about using the doc cam, but I think I'm just going to do this. So the problem is I'm going to have to remember to scroll down and stuff. Y'all can see that, right? Can you see it now? Yeah? Okay. Oh, good. Okay, whatever. Okay. According to Josef Pieper in his Guide to Thomas Aquinas. By the way, Pieper, this was written in German. Obviously, maybe that's not obvious, but it was written in German. And one of the things that I find interesting about Josef Pieper is that he translated C.S. Lewis's The Abolition of Man, I think. No, The Problem of Pain. The Problem of Pain into English along with his wife. So I could say more about Pieper, but I'll leave it at that. According to Josef Pieper in his Guide to Thomas Aquinas, this 13th century Doctor Communis Ecclesiae, what does that mean? That means the common doctor of the church. That's something that took place in 1879. Thomas Aquinas is very, very important to understand modern Catholic thought and therefore to understand modern Christian thought. And in 1879, there was a papal encyclical called Aeterni Patris that sort of mandated the teaching of Thomas Aquinas in all seminaries and in all Catholic universities. And at that point, Thomas Aquinas sort of became the gold standard for Catholic thought. Now, he was important before that, but with 1879, the papal encyclical Aeterni Patris, I'll write that on the board, he became even more important. And I think that that's whenever people started referring to him as the Doctor Communis Ecclesiae, okay? This is a papal encyclical, Aeterni Patris. Okay? That's wrong. 1879. Okay? All right. According to Josef Pieper, blah, 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 this 13th century doctor is highly to be commended, or at least studied, for his successful synthesis of various strands of thought. Now, who can tell me what strands might we be talking about? And what does the word synthesis mean? The word synthesis means putting stuff together, right? Whenever we start reading the actual Summa, we're going to see up close and personal how he does dialectic, how he takes the opinion of one thinker and then takes the opinion of a different thinker, and even if the two thinkers seem to be disagreeing, he puts them together. That's a synthesis. So even right now, you should be able to guess, or at least speculate about these strands, different strands. What might some of these strands of thought be that Thomas takes together and puts together? Platonic philosophical, good. What else? What have we been talking about throughout the whole class? That medieval philosophy, and which is sort of inseparable from theology, but that medieval thought consists of what? Jacob Dunn, I know you know. We've talked about it. That's it. Stuff like that. Good. Indeed, St. Thomas is, for Pieper, the great thinker of the both and. The both and. Both Hebrew and Greek, both Aristotle and Plato, etc. Before developing how Pieper articulates the Thomistic both and, however, I will briefly map out the structure of the book and its 12 chapters while summarizing the salient points. Chapters 1 through 3 have as their main thrust Thomas's biographical background, including his educational formation at the feet of Albert Magnus. That was his master, his teacher, Albert the Great. Albert the Great, so Thomas Aquinas's teacher was Albert the Great. St. Bonaventure's teacher was Alexander of Hales. And the only reason I'm bringing that up, I'll tell you why I'm bringing it up. So Albert the Great, that's Albert Magnus, Albert the Great, and Alexander of Hales. Can you read that? Alexander of Hales. Now, was Thomas Aquinas a Dominican or a Franciscan? Who can remind me? He was Dominican, and therefore his teacher was also what? Right. Was Bonaventure Dominican or Franciscan? Franciscan, and therefore his teacher, Alexander of Hales, was also what? Franciscan. And the Franciscans and the Dominicans, as we'll see in a moment, their origins are very, very similar and related. The origins of these two orders began at the same time and for similar reasons. But the reason I mentioned that their two teachers respectively is because it was in the generation of Albert the Great and Alexander of Hales that Aristotle gets rediscovered. Okay, we've talked about this a lot, including at the very beginning when we read the article by whom? Gracia. So it's in the generation of Albert the Great and Alexander of Hales that Aristotle gets rediscovered. Okay, both of these men drank deeply of Aristotle. Albert the Great probably gave him a more massive high five than Alexander of Hales did. Alexander of Hales, being a Franciscan, was probably a little more nervous about Aristotle. Now, why would a Christian be nervous about Aristotle? Yes, but why would Aristotle's thought be threatening to Christian orthodoxy? Maybe. Any thoughts? Any thoughts at all? You know what I mean by orthodoxy, right? Just like, you could, let's leave it at that for now, yes. It means a lot more than that, but let's leave it at that for now. Why would Aristotle's thought be threatening to a Christian or to Christian orthodoxy? Any thoughts? Oh, absolutely. I mean, as we talked about 1 or 2 classes ago, Mirka, no one has ever said that other than Christians. I mean, Buddhists don't think that. No one thinks that. It's almost like that's the craziest idea that has ever occurred to a human being. So you're right, but I think that there's even more basic reasons why someone like Aristotle would be threatening to Christianity, or would seem to be threatening to Christianity. Mason, do you have anything? I mean, I think that that's a good guess. I think that that would make an awesome paper topic. I would disagree with that. I think that someone like, if you look at the church fathers, if you look at the church fathers, for example, who invented the doctrine of the Trinity, people like Gregory of Nyssa, the Cappadocian fathers, even if you were to look at Augustine, I would say that they're just as committed to reason as Aristotle is. Now, it would take a whole semester to develop that claim, and that this is the sort of reasons why people do graduate degrees. I would disagree with what you said. Maybe others would agree with it. I would disagree with it. What about the doctrine of creation? Maybe we haven't really covered this in this class, although I bet we have. I bet it was in the Gracia article. Aristotle thinks that the world, and by world we mean the material cosmos, Aristotle thinks that the world has what? Always existed. That the material cosmos has existed for an infinity of previous moments. Do Christians believe that? Right. What do Christians believe? Yes. Technically, that belief is technically, in my view, and most people's view, compatible with the notion that the material universe has existed for an infinite number of months. I know it's crazy, but so you need to say something more specific that contradicts Aristotle's doctrine that the world has existed for an infinitely past number of moments. And the more specific thing that you would need to say is that that the world had a temporal beginning. This is a theological hot potato, because there are lots of people who want to. There are Orthodox Christians who actually have probably believed that the world never has always existed. I know that sounds crazy, doesn't it? But let's try to keep it simple in this class, and just say that someone like Bonaventure and someone like Thomas Aquinas do want to say that the world has a temporal beginning point. Okay? And that's true. Both Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas do think that. Thomas Aquinas actually argues that it is just as reasonable to think that the world has always existed, that there's never been a time that the material cosmos has not existed, that there's been an infinite number of past moments. I think that that's the most precise way of putting it. Thomas Aquinas says that that's actually totally rational, and just as rational as the idea that at a moment that the world came into being at time zero. Thomas Aquinas says that those are equally rational, but because of revelation, we have to admit that the world began at a specific moment in time. Does that make sense? Bonaventure says, oh, no, that view of an infinite amount of past moments is inherently irrational. that make sense? So Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas disagree on that. The bottom line right now is that this is one of the reasons why Christians would be threatened by Aristotle, because he doesn't think that, not only does he think that the world has existed for an infinite number of past moments, he also doesn't think that God created the world. Now, he does think that the world depends on God. We talked about the unmoved mover, and in the deduction of the unmoved mover that we looked at in Aristotle's Metaphysics, we saw, for example, that Aristotle thinks that God is the final cause of the world and the efficient cause of the world. Remember, I wrote up Aristotle's 4 causes on the board last time. You remember that? So even Aristotle would agree that the material cosmos depends on God and that God is the cause of the material cosmos. And yet, he's still threatening, at least he feels threatening, to what most Christians have always assumed about creation. Does that make sense? So for example, if you think about the Big Bang is actually what Orthodox Christians held about. It's what Bonaventure thinks, that there was a beginning, a time zero in which the world popped into existence out of nothing. That the Big Bang seems to say that same thing. Aristotle says, oh, no, there's no such thing as the Big Bang. The world has always existed for an infinite number of past moments. Aquinas thinks that those are both equally rational, but because of revelation, aka the Bible, we have to admit that the Big Bang is closer to the truth. Bonaventure says, no, the Big Bang version of the truth, that there was a moment in time that it popped into existence, that is rational. And that Aristotle's view that it's existed for an infinite number of past moments is inherently irrational. I tend to agree with Bonaventure. But the people who read my dissertation tend to agree with Thomas Aquinas. Anyway, the point is, this is just one reason why Aristotle seemed threatening, okay? There's other reasons, like for example, Aristotle seems to say, this is in places like the Nicomachean Ethics, but it's also in the Metaphysics, that the life of reason alone can lead the human being to what? Perfection. You might say beatitude. Let me hear you say beatitude. What does that mean? Have you ever heard of the Beatitudes in the Bible, in the Gospels, Matthew chapter 5? Blessed are the poor, for they will inherit the earth, whatever. Blessed are the meek, blessed are those who mourn. In Greek, it's beatudo. Beatitude is Christian language for perfection. Now, there's a lot of things that we don't have time to talk about it. Remember the oak tree, the acorn and the oak tree? Remember how I stressed that what it means to say that the oak tree is perfect is simply that it's achieving its purpose, its telos. It's no longer a potential oak tree, it's now an actual oak tree. That's how the ancients and the medievals, the pre-moderns, thought about perfection. But the point right now is, let me give you a second reason why Aristotle seems threatening to Christians. It's because he seems to say, it's basically this: you don't need grace to achieve your telos. The word telos means purpose. I want you to know that word. The word telos means purpose. I want you to know that word. Let me hear you say telos. That will be on a final exam, okay? And Aristotle says you don't need grace to become fully human, to achieve your telos. Do you need God? Well, kind of. You need to do the same sorts of activities that God does. He calls it contemplation, but it's still threatening. Are you with me? Can you see how this would be threatening? There were literally people in the arts faculty, and I can't believe I'm talking so long. There were literally people in the arts faculty at the University of Paris. Where did Albert the Great and Alexander of Hales teach? The University of Paris. And so where did Albert the Great's disciple Thomas Aquinas teach? The University of Paris. Where did Alexander of Hales' disciple Bonaventure teach? The University of Paris, okay? But they taught in the theology faculty. In the arts faculty, That's kind of like the liberal arts. Think about it, just think about it like as if it were philosophy. In the arts faculty, there were literally professors who said, we don't need God, we don't need Jesus. Aristotle is the be all and end all. Aristotle's got the goods. And guess what, y'all? The people who were saying this, the professors in the arts faculty, they were priests. They were priests. Everyone who taught at the University of Paris were priests. Some of them were religious, aka monks, aka people who took monastic vows, like Thomas Aquinas and Bonaventure. Others of them were secular priests. What does that mean? It means that they had a parish, basically. They didn't take monastic vows. That's called a secular priest. So you've got secular and religious. I would be a secular priest because I haven't taken monastic vows, but I am a priest, okay? Everyone who taught at the University of Paris was a priest, including the ones in the arts faculty. And yet, these priests who were teaching in the arts faculty were saying, we don't need the Bible. Aristotle is the be-all and end-all. This is how smitten with Aristotle they were. Does that make sense? And by the way, isn't that crazy? I mean, is this how you thought about the medieval ages? No, it's not. But this is how it was. Yeah. A couple of names of these arts faculty people who thought this. Boethius, and I think that Gracia actually mentions them. Boethius of Dacia, and Siger of Brabant. These were two dudes who were priests who taught in the arts faculty who said, we don't need Jesus, we don't need the Bible. Aristotle is the be-all and end-all. Aristotle was intoxicating. Now, can you see how this is threatening? Y'all, this debate, and I got to keep reading, but this debate between Aristotle on the one hand and what I'm just going to call for now the church hierarchy, it exists to this day. I may have said in the last class or in the last couple of classes that I would argue that we still live in the Middle Ages. Did I say that? That's a crazy claim, is it not? And yet this is justification for it. Because what Aristotle is putting down is autonomous human reason. From the point of view of theological orthodoxy, people who say we need the revelation. In order for us to know the truth, we have to be enlightened by God. For people like that, it's threatening to think that an autonomous human mind can discover the truth. We call that natural reason, but that's exactly what Aristotle thinks. And this is exactly why Thomas Aquinas is so amazing, because even though huge swaths of the ecclesiastical hierarchy were scared of Aristotle, I don't have time to prove that to you. Aristotle was condemned, blah, blah, blah. Even Thomas Aquinas was condemned. Even though huge swaths of the church hierarchy was threatened by Aristotle and started censoring and banning books, nevertheless, Thomas Aquinas gives Aristotle a high five. That's crazy, and it's awesome. Thomas Aquinas says, all truth is God's truth. We don't need to be afraid of science. We don't need to be afraid of Aristotle. We can find a way to integrate it and create a synthesis between Aristotle's autonomous human reason on the one hand and what we receive from revelation, aka the Bible, on the other hand. Okay? Yes.
Am I right to say the distinction between Dominican and Franciscan orders are people who both agree that revelation ought to be, our first principle, but different reactions on how to view the start of Aristotle, like Dominicans?
Yes, that is a tendency. It is a tendency. That is a tendency that we find when we look at Dominicans and when we look at Franciscans. Yes, yeah. I don't think that that's a hard and fast distinction, but it's a tendency that we tend to find, precisely because of the posture of Alexander the Great vis-a-vis Aristotle versus the posture of Alexander of Hales vis-a-vis Aristotle. Alexander of Hales was more standoffish. Albert the Great was more embracive. Yeah? So I think that that's right in general terms, but it's a tendency. It's not some hard and fast theoretical distinction. Yeah. It's super complicated, y'all. I mean, you know, if you were going to Harvard or even the University of Texas, you could major in this. Like you could major in medieval studies, and this is the kind of thing that you would take many, many courses on. You know what? I want to table that. I want to table this question, and when we get to the Ewart Cousins introduction on Bonaventure, it'll come back up. The Ewart Cousins introduction on Bonaventure, this will come back up. Okay, so that's what I want to do for now, Mason. But you can see here that very, very soon you're going to be reading the introduction to the Bonaventure book by Ewart Cousins, and this will come back up. So when we get to Bonaventure, we'll see more. Okay? Good. Now, Jacob, did you have a question?
Yes, I did.
Go ahead.
So the professors, the priests at the School of Paris didn't want to incorporate anything.
I think you mean the arts faculty.
Yes.
There were 3 faculties in medieval universities: arts, law, and theology. And theology was the queen of the sciences. Theology, like most people wanted to study arts in order to study theology. That's what's so crazy about CJ and Boethius, is that they're like, who needs theology? We got the goods, Aristotle. And so it was revolutionary and threatening that there were actually arts faculty professors who didn't want to become theology professors. So I interrupted you. I think you mean the arts faculty. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to keep reading. Good. I'm going to, okay, look with me at Roman numeral 1. Chapters 1 through 3 have as their main thrust Thomas's biographical background, including his educational formation at the feet of Albert Magnus. That word Magnus means great, Albert the Great, who introduced him to Dionysius the Areopagite, page 12, and some brief remarks on the mainly 20th century Thomas studies, period. Crucial to this biographical summary is what one might call its political frame. Its political frame. As early as Thomas's decision to enter the newly formed mendicant order founded by Saint Dominic, this word mendicant means to beg, begging. So both the Dominicans and the Franciscans took vows of poverty and were dependent on other people to give them their sustenance and their provisions, okay? That's what that word mendicant means. The Dominicans and the Franciscans are both mendicant orders, which, by the way, means that they weren't cloistered. Cloistered, like Benedictine monks and Cistercians they live their lives sort of in the cloister of a monastery, always in the monastery, always praying or gardening, basically. But the mendicant orders, like the Franciscans and the Dominicans, had a worldly vocation. They would go out into the world and do stuff. The Dominicans helped train preachers. They would help train people to be better preachers, and the Franciscans had a different vocation. But mendicant means that they went out into the world and begged, basically. Okay? Now, who founded the Dominican order? Saint Dominic. One can discern the tensions looming in the background between the emperor and pope, : Thomas was kidnapped by his brothers, who were friendly to the Emperor Frederick II. Thomas's decision to enter the Dominican order was scandalous, undermining the status quo of the dominant traditional Orthodox ecclesial establishment of the day. See, one thing you have to understand about Francis and Dominic is that they were kind of rebels. They were revolutionaries. As we're going to see when we get closer to Bonaventure, they were like hippies who loved Jesus. I mean, they were radical. They were radical people who rejected the status quo. They rejected power. They rejected wealth. Okay? So Thomas Aquinas' family did not want him to become a monk. He did it against their will. It was an act of rebellion. Okay? Hence, even in this early decision, we can discern a certain cast of character, a certain frame of mind, which is willing to pursue the truth at all costs, willing to take inconvenient positions, willing to take a stance which his peers consider to be contradictory. In fact, as early as on page 21, Pieper foreshadows a major theme of his book by saying that the young Thomas, quote, undertook the enormous task of choosing everything. Right? Thomas is the theologian, the philosopher of the both and. He chose everything. Aristotle and the Bible, right? Both the standard features of church life. When you see that, the standard features of church life, you should think about bishops, popes, really like ornate cathedrals with gold-plated walls. Are you with me? So Thomas Aquinas embraced both the standard features of church life and the radical biblical commitment to sanctifying what? Poverty. I cannot emphasize enough how important what I call the evangelical poverty movement is for understanding the medieval thought. I call it evangelical poverty movement. The evangelical poverty movement. What does the word evangelical mean? It just means gospel. The evangel or the euangelion is just the gospel. Whatever the gospel is, that's what the evangelion is. The evangel, okay? And I can't emphasize enough how important this movement is. This social political movement is to the thought of Thomas and Bonaventure, okay? Let's keep going. Chapter 2 gives a preliminary version of Thomas's everything, his initial refusal to choose between the Bible and or Aristotle. Quote, Thomas's assimilative powers excluded nothing, omitted nothing, and insisted that everything that is belongs. For example, both the Bible and the metaphysics of Aristotle, right? I think that makes sense to you. The, quote, political frame mentioned above re-emerges with the origins of the Dominican order in the so-called Albigensian controversy in the south of France, chapter 3. What is striking here, so look, y'all, the Albigensians were heretics. Okay? The word heresy comes from a Greek word, hierasis, that means choosing. I don't know if I talked to your introduction class about this. Hierasis means choosing. What heresy is imagine this spectrum. Can you see that? Imagine this spectrum and just pretend like you're like a medieval Christian or something. This spectrum here, this continuum, represents the grand spectrum of God's truth. Everything that the Bible teaches as the church has historically understood it. The truth about human beings, the truth about the cosmos, the truth about sex, the truth about your diet, the truth about human relations, the truth about everything, okay? And what a heretic does, the truth about sin, the truth about evil, the truth about the fall, okay? What a heretic does is looks at this grand spectrum of what you might call total truth and says, I really like this part. Look, it's so cool. Jesus Christ was a man. He really was human. And they get so myopically fixated on this little bitty sliver of the whole that they forget about this and they forget about this. Are you with me? So heresy is a half truth, or a 1/10 truth, or a 1/100th truth. It's not false. It's just not complete. So the Albigensians in the south of France were heretics. okay? What is striking here is the original impetus for St. Dominic to engage with the heretics on their own terms. In fact, in his efforts not just to affirm the grains of truth in the Albigensian position, but actually to live them out, Dominic models for Thomas a new way to engage with the world, a way of affirming truth wherever it may be found, and at the same time, taking one's interlocutors seriously such that their dignity is affirmed. I'm going to finish reading this paragraph, and I'm going to explain it, okay? In all of this, Dominic was doing battle not primarily against the heretics, but with the newly minted office of the Inquisition of the Catholic Church. Hence, one can see the political stakes involved. Political sacrifice, or at least risk, was required for Dominic not only to oppose the hierarchical authority of the church, but also to side with the Albigensians, whose controversial heresy included the evangelical ideal of Christ-like poverty as a necessary condition for spiritual sanctification. What's going on here is that we don't have time. I don't have time to give you like the details of what the Albigensians believed, but basically they insisted on radical purity, like radical renunciation of the world, okay? And they basically said, if you don't radically renounce wealth and power, you can't be a Christian, stuff like that. It really threatened the hierarchy of the church. St. Dominic relocates, he moves in with them in the south of France. He has a few men with him. They move in, they put down roots, they begin to live with the Albigensians, and they not only do they give them a high five for their affirmation of this sliver of the whole truth, but they live it out. They live it out. And so the Inquisition, which you've all heard of, because we live in a world which is biased against the Catholic Church, the Inquisition that you've all heard of was on one side, and these poor Albigensians were on the other side. The Inquisition was wanting to like chop their heads off. Dominic moves in and sort of fights on both fronts, but also kind of sort of takes the side of the heretics a little bit. Now, the only reason he was affirming their heresy and living it out is because he wanted to show them the full truth. Okay? Does that make sense?
He wasn't a heretic himself. He was
Absolutely not.
He was just trying to like, hey, you're right here, but there's also this whole line.
Wouldn't you agree that in order to show someone the truth, in order to open someone's eyes, they need to trust you? Yeah, that's what he was doing. He was earning trust, which is what all good missionaries do. Unfortunately, there's a lot of bad missionaries out there. But yeah, that's right. That's right, Jacob. Yeah, he would say that they were heretics. And again, this is all in chapter 3 of the Pieper book. Okay? I'm not making this stuff up. All right, we're going to keep going. Similar political stakes come into play for Thomas at the University of Paris. So see, what I'm trying to do here is say, as for St. Dominic, so also for St. Thomas. St. Dominic did something really intriguing that refused to take sides. What are the two sides that St. Dominic refused to take? The church hierarchy and the Albigensians. As for St. Dominic, so also for St. Thomas. There's something in the DNA of this order that Thomas imbibes, okay? So similar political stakes come into play for Thomas at the University of Paris, which Pieper discusses in earnest in chapter 6 of the book. In this setting, however, not just one, but two controversies raged, intertwined. Not just the mendicant controversy foreshadowed by the Albigensian origins of the order of preachers. The order of preachers, that's the Dominicans. So if you ever see, like, let's just pretend like I were a Dominican monk, which would be nice. I sometimes feel that it would be nice, especially when my wife and I get in a fight. But my name would be Matt Bolter, OP. This is how my name would appear if I were a Dominican monk. OP means order of preachers. Okay? So that's what it means right here when it says order of preachers. Now, the Franciscans, imagine that I was a Franciscan. I would be Matt Bolter, OFM, Order of Friars Minor. Order of Friars Minor. This is the Franciscans, okay? But also the reception of Aristotle, specifically portions of his logical works, his natural philosophy, and his psychology. Gracia talks about this. We talked about this earlier. What's being referenced here, his logical works, his natural philosophy, and his psychology, this is the stuff that was rediscovered. Okay? By the way, in Aristotle, you know how for Aristotle, soul and body always go together? You know how for Aristotle, everything in the world is a what? A composite unity of form and matter. Everything in the world for Aristotle is a composite unity of form and matter. That's true for the human being, the human animal, the rational animal. But for us, the form is called what? Soul. The form of the human being is called soul. The matter of the human being is called what? Body. So you see, for Aristotle, soul and body go together. It's like a lichen. A lichen is a symbiotic union, a symbiosis of fungus and algae. And if one of them dies, the whole thing dies. In a lichen, the fungus can't survive without the algae, and the algae can't survive without the fungus. If one of them dies, they both die. And that's how Aristotle thinks of the psychosomatic, soul-body, psychosomatic union of the human person. If the body dies, the soul dies. And if the soul dies, the body dies. That's different from whom? And who else? Yes, that's different from Descartes and Plato, who both tend to think that the soul is the be-all and end-all of the human person and that the body doesn't really matter. At least that's the stereotype, and it's largely true. But you see, what my point right now is that for Aristotle, because he thinks that the soul is totally woven together with the body, for Aristotle, psychology is a part of natural philosophy. Let me repeat that. Because for Aristotle, the soul is so woven together with the body, with the biological, for Aristotle, you can't separate the soul out from the biological organism. They go together. And that is why, for him, psychology is a part of biology. Okay. So there's two controversies that are raging at the University of Paris in Thomas's context. Number one, the mendicant controversy, in which these mendicant orders, the Dominicans and the Franciscans, who embraced the evangelical poverty movement, were saying, look, it's not optional for a Christian to be poor. You want to be a Christian, you got to renounce your riches. And then certain people were threatened by that. Bishops, popes. So this is a controversy, but it's only one of two controversies. What's the other controversy that was raging at the University of Paris? Bible versus Aristotle. Okay? Bible versus Aristotle. Just as St. Dominic occupied a kind of middle position between the Catholic establishment on the one hand and the Albigensians on the other, so also here Thomas comes to embody a third way between the Aristotle imbibing arts faculty, represented by CJ of Brabant and Boethius of Dacia, on the one hand, and the orthodox traditional gatekeepers of the university on the other. And the orthodox gatekeepers of the university were suspicious of whom? Of Aristotle. Okay? True to the spirit of Dominic, Thomas is to a large extent misunderstood and caught in the middle. Y'all, this is what the Pieper book is about. If you think this is interesting, this is what the Pieper book is about, okay? I'm going to keep going. We've got about 10 minutes. Aggravating this state of affairs at Paris, do you see how, like, fraught with tension this is? Thomas Aquinas isn't some armchair philosopher who's just theoretically speculating. I mean, in a way, he's fighting for his life. There were people who wanted to kill him. You know, one of the stereotypes of the medieval age, which is true, is that people would get their heads chopped off for being heretics. There were people who wanted Thomas's head to be chopped off, okay? Why? 2 reasons. Number one, he embraced poverty and said it's essential. Secondly, he said, you know what, this Aristotle dude, we can embrace him. So these were turbulent times for Thomas Aquinas. Aggravating the state of affairs at Paris, at the University of Paris, was a kind of political alliance which trapped Thomas in the middle. Pope, mendicant orders with their master generals. Hang on, I got to read this. Yeah, I'm going to skip that. It's kind of complicated. There were 2 sides. Thomas is caught in the middle. I'm going to keep reading. Chapters 4 and 5 provide a kind of interlude in the overall cultural situation in which Pieper addresses Thomas's approach to Aristotle. In chapter 4, Pieper introduces the idea of creature as symbol. Okay, this is important. I can explain this. Creature as symbol, which held sway in the pre-Aristotelian mind, but which to some extent becomes obsolete by the 12th century. What happened in the 12th century? Aristotle's rediscovered. Y'all check this out. What this is saying is that before Aristotle's rediscovered, right? Before this generation of Albert the Great and Alexander of Hales in the 12th century, Thomas and Bonaventure are the 13th century. Albert and Alexander are the 12th century. Aristotle's rediscovered in the 12th century. And what's going on here is before that, that is to say, in the Augustinian tradition, because Augustine was like the big influence prior to the rediscovery of Aristotle, okay? When people talked about creatures, frogs, cats, planets, they saw those creatures as symbols. What is a symbol? A symbol is something that points to something else, like a sign. So prior to the rediscovery of Aristotle, everything talked about God. The assumption was that everything in the world said something about God. Everything in the world is a symbol pointing to God. So the human being is a symbol pointing to God. Like if I know Mirka, if I know Jacob, then I can learn something about God because they're symbols. But after the rediscovery of Aristotle, what? After the rediscovery of Aristotle, you don't need to talk about God in order to understand a frog. You don't need to talk about God in order to understand the truth about an oak tree. You can study the thing for its own sake It doesn't need to be a symbol anymore. You see that? This is connected to this notion of autonomous human reason, that the human mind can study things scientifically without reference to God. Okay, so let me keep reading. In chapter 4, Pieper introduces the idea of creature as symbol, which held sway in the pre-Aristotelian mind, but which to some extent becomes obsolete by the 12th century. Over and against this approach is the Aristotelian affirmation of nature. By the way, even the word nature is different from the word creation, is it not? If I say, what if I were, yeah, what does creation imply? It implies a creator, does it not? But does the word nature imply a creator? No. It's autonomous. It's independent from God, maybe. And this is what Aristotle thinks. Remember, the Greek word for nature is physios, which is where we get our word physics. So, over and against this approach is the Aristotelian affirmation of nature. Nature on its own terms, nature for its own sake. You don't need the Bible to understand what nature is in Aristotle's mind. This is what Boethius and CJ were like, whoa, this is amazing, okay? Over and against this approach is the Aristotelian affirmation of nature having an independence quite apart from any reference to God. Pieper states in a nutshell that Thomas regards this Aristotelian nature as bound up with the Christian affirmation of creation. In other words, Thomas Aquinas looks at Aristotle and everything that Aristotle says about nature, and he's like, okay, that's cool. Now, he also realizes that nature is creation, but he's willing to just sort of like give Aristotle a high five because he's so brilliant. And he thinks that we can learn from Aristotle. He doesn't see the need to condemn Aristotle as a heretic just because Aristotle doesn't talk about the Christian God, the creator God, okay? I'm going to finish this. I'm going to finish Roman numeral 1. I'm going to keep reading. Chapters 7 through 9 consider important literary and linguistic features of St. Thomas's output. So now we're talking about the stuff that Thomas wrote. Chapter 7, and this is important. We're going to get to this next week or on Wednesday, God willing. Oh, sorry. Actually, we'll probably still be on this Wednesday. But whenever we get to Thomas, the Summa, the 5 ways, we will talk about disputatio. I call it the quaestio method. I may have written that on the board in a previous class. Same thing. Chapter 7 focuses on the disputatio as a kind of developmental extension of Socratic dialogue. What is Socratic dialogue? It's 2 voices, Socrates and Euthyphro, Socrates and Meno, Socrates and the Sophists, and putting them together. Taking 2 different views and putting them together. Another word for that is the word dialectic. And what Pieper's saying right now is that you see this in Thomas's writing. When Thomas is writing, he's taking the opinion of one person, and then next he's considering the opinion of another person, and then maybe 2 more, and he's saying, can we put these together somehow? Can we learn something from all of them? Now, he's not afraid to disagree with them, but he thinks that they're all valuable. And that is an extension of Socratic dialogue for Pieper, and Pieper's right, in which dialogue partners, including students, are seen as crucial to the quest for truth. Here one sees a connection with the posture of St. Dominic, which allowed him to listen deeply, precisely to those in the gravest error, those heretics known as the Albigensians. Dominic listened to them and tried to learn from the heretics, according to Pieper. This method of questing for the truth, Pieper shows, yields a kind of universality unparalleled in the West, past or present. In the same vein, chapter 8 highlights Thomas's unique and specific vocation as teacher, while also giving a bird's eye view of the angelic doctor. Thomas Aquinas is the angelic doctor. Bonaventure is the seraphic doctor. So Thomas is the angelic doctor. That's Thomas. Bonaventure is the seraphic doctor. This is a medieval philosophy class, people. I got to talk about stuff like this. I'm almost done. Are you good?
I was just trying to see the board.
You seraphic, S-E-R-A-P-H-I-C. Yep, seraphic. A seraph is a kind of angel. The book of Isaiah speaks of cherubim and seraphim. Earlier, we heard about a guy named Dionysius the Areopagite. I read about him earlier. Dionysius the Areopagite wrote something called the Celestial Hierarchy, in which he invents the notion that there's 9 choirs, ranks of angels, 9. Is it a coincidence that 9 is a multiple of 3? No, it's not. Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite is the one who develops the Christian understanding of angels as this hierarchy of 9 orders. Cherubim and seraphim are at the very bottom. So like Saint Michael, the archangel, is either a cherubim or a seraphim, or a seraph, I can't remember which, okay? Medieval philosophy is crazy, and it's a world unto its own. It's important. You can't understand modern thought without it, but it's funky. All right, I'm going to keep going. Okay, I'm gonna read for 3 more minutes at the most. In the same vein, chapter 8 highlights Thomas's unique and specific vocation as teacher, while also giving a bird's eye view of the angelic doctor's various genre. Major works, opuscula, commentaries, quaestiones disputate. No wonder I call it the quaestio method and he calls it disputatio, because it's the quaestiones disputate and the 2 summas. We are going to look at one of the 2 summas, the Summa Theologiae. And we're looking at like 2 questions. It's like 1% of the entire thing. And that entire thing is supposedly for beginners. Like training wheels, floaties, if you're trying to swim and you're a little baby, right? But the other, we're looking at one of the 2 summae, one of the 2 summas. The word summa means summary. Chapter 9 deals with medieval Latin as the la langue vivante dell'université. Chapter 10, setting the stage for the climax of the book, found in the last 2 chapters, introduces the mature Thomistic conjunctio in opposition, this is over our heads for this class, in opposition to both the Latin Averroist of C.J. of Brabant and the spiritualistic unworldliness of the age's traditional theology. Again, this is a false dichotomy. Latin Averroism, for the purposes of this class, you can just think of it as like drinking deeply of Aristotle and like Aristotle on steroids. It's Christians who imbibe Aristotle too much, according to Thomas Aquinas. That's Latin Averroism. I'm sure that Gracia talked about Latin Averroism. Averroes was a Muslim commentator, and I think we may have mentioned him in the class already, and he's referred to as the commentator with a capital C. Who in Thomas is the philosopher with a capital P? Aristotle. Averroes is the commentator with a capital C. Who is Averroes commenting on? Aristotle. Okay? Averroes. I'll write that. Averroes. All right, I'm almost done. in three theses, which suggest the coordination of philosophy and theology, Pieper construes this synthesis in terms of the theological underpinning of nature, the goodness of all things, and the importance of the what? The what? The incarnation to the synthesis. What is the incarnation? It's the notion that God became man, that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, that God became a little baby that burped and nourished himself on his mother's breasts, stuff like that. Okay. Chapters 11 and 12 close out the book with a treatment of the two topics I want to focus more deeply on now. Being as pure act, esse as actus purus. Being, remember we've talked about the difference between being. All right, I got to talk about this. Look, there's two topics that I'm going to talk about below. One of them is the relationship between philosophy and theology. That's one thing. What is the relationship between philosophy and theology? That's one of two topics, okay? The other topic is this, esse as actus purus. For 2 minutes, I want to talk about esse and actus purus. We've talked in this class about the distinction between being and essence. Weirdly, this word right here is the Latin way of saying being. This is an infinitive in Latin. It means to be. If we were speaking Spanish, we would say ser, S-E-R, ser. But in Latin, it's esse, to be. To be or not to be, that is the question. That's esse, okay? So esse is not essence, counterintuitively. It's the opposite of essence, being/existence. Esse means existence. Now, it says here, esse is actus purus. What is actus purus? It's pure act. What is pure act? You already know what it is, but you don't know that you know what it is. Remember Aristotle's metaphysical spectrum? What's on this side? Come on, what's on this side? Prime matter, an acorn, potentiality. What's the opposite of potentiality? Listen, what is the potentiality? What is the opposite of potentiality? Actuality. Form is the opposite of what? You know it. Think. What? Matter. Form is the opposite of matter. The opposite of potentiality is actuality, which is exactly this. Act. When Thomas says that being is pure act, what he's talking about is this. He's talking about the oak tree. What's the point about the oak tree? It's perfect. It's living into its telos, its purpose. That's how Thomas Aquinas imagines being. Being. What does it mean for something to be? What it means for something to be is that it's fully actualized, like God, like Aristotle's unmoved mover. That's what this phrase, esse as actus purus, means. Being as pure act. Being as pure actuality with no potentiality at all. None of the acorn, 0% acorn, 100% oak tree. That's how Thomas imagines being. Okay? And y'all, will close it right there. Peace. We have one presentation on Wednesday, and that is Malia, who I haven't seen in many weeks, and I've never seen in person. So Malia, I hope you're listening, and I hope that you're ready to present on Wednesday. You, my friend, will present next Wednesday. Okay? See you on Wednesday. And I hope that this gets uploaded to the cloud. I bet it will.